will deliver success to your platform project. Please join me in welcoming Jill.
It is my honour and privilege to be the first speaker here this morning, and I will be doing something a little bit different to what you've heard on the video, in that I am not, in spite of what my presentation is called, I am not focusing on the detailed how, and certainly not the detailed technical how. I will be staying in the area where I play most happily and focusing on my favourite three-letter word. Well done. If I had sweets or prizes, I would give you some, but unfortunately I came empty-handed. So yes, why? Any of you that have read any of my material, been on any of my training, will know that there is always a very big emphasis on why we should do anything, why we should choose one technique over another, and lots of other things. But given that I've only got 35 minutes, and probably isn't a good idea to spend 34 and a half of them talking about myself, so I will move on. Particularly following the video that we saw, I am sure that nobody in this room needs an introduction to Power Platform, Dataverse, AI Builder, and all of that lot. So I will leave the picture, and you can all think about what it means to you. However, what I would like to say is that while this family of products does bring fantastic benefits to organisations, to people, to communities, to businesses, to lots of other things that we can put into that mix, it also comes with challenges. And it is not as simple as many of the people on those earlier videos made out. There is no pot of pink or any other colour pills that we can all just go, pop a few of them over a short period of time, and bang, we know Power Platform, Power Pages, Power Automate, or anything else. Some of the challenges of the Power Platform are the whole idea of citizen developers who can and will create their own apps. Another challenge is that apps and software more generally is not necessarily straightforward to use for a user. That is something that citizen developers, IT people, the people in this room, more often than is good, forget. That sure, we can build a thing and it will do something. But even if that thing is perfect, and it rarely is, let's be honest, but even if that thing is completely perfect, just sending an email to a typical user and saying, go to this URL, log on in this way, bang, you can do an expense claim, you can enter a timesheet, you can do a vehicle log, you can whatever else, or whatever your thing does. This perfect thing, if it's perfect, and those log-on instructions to the user are only 2 out of maybe a dozen steps of that whole process. And we need to remember those in the middle that it takes to get our thing usable by the end users. So the other challenge that is closely related to what I've just said is training. That when we have nice standard applications in use across an organisation, we can have hand in glove with those standard applications some standard training, and at appropriate time in people's professional development they can go on an appropriate course to learn an application that is now becoming part of their world. If we have a situation where apps or things are just popping up, and worse still, emails are going out along the lines of go to this URL, log on in this way, and do your expense claim, enter your vehicle log, put in a receipt, whatever the thing does, we now need to think, how do we do training? Who is responsible for training? So maybe that's one of the pieces that sits between our thing and our end user being able to use it. They are just some of the challenges that this new low-code, no-code, easy world give us. Citizen development, as we heard in that video at the beginning, is essentially people, and specifically people who are not IT trained or not computer science trained, creating, developing things that will help in their business. The vast majority of citizen developers, genuine citizen developers, do typically focus on their part of the business because they will be doing their job, whatever that means, and we've got a selection of potential citizen developers on the screen there. They will be doing their job, and they will come across a problem. When I am doing blah, this process is tedious. This process is convoluted. This process could be made simpler if, finish the sentence in whatever way is appropriate. So they then come up with a way of simplifying, typically from a very self-centered perspective, that process for themselves. Typically it will work really well for them, but as I alluded to a moment ago, it working well for them does not mean that it works well for everyone else in the organisation. Another challenge is all of the budget issues. In that, sure, we can now get apps, things that don't come directly out of IT budget, but they're not free. And we also need to be aware, are these apps something that can be completely from go to woe developed by these citizen developers? Or do we have an interesting application of the 80-20 rule where a citizen developer is doing 80%, but maybe only 20% of the complete product, and then it's getting handed off to other people? So we certainly need to be aware of some of these challenges around this so-called massive drop in cost, because the majority of citizen developers are not working for free. Citizen developers sit roughly in the middle between end users and IT professionals. And that I would argue with this slide that the majority of IT professionals are those that have either got an IT, computer science, something of that ilk, higher tertiary education qualification, and end users are people who use technology but probably have little interest in the improving and so on. So citizen developers sit in that niche in between those two groups of people. In a typical organisation, you are unlikely to have more than about 10% of your users stepping up into that citizen developer role. Obviously it will vary, and I'd be quite happy to believe if somebody said, but in our organisation at least 50%, fine, that's true for you, but I still think overall we'll be looking at less than 10% of end users are stepping up into that citizen developer. Even though there are relatively few of them compared to the number of end users, we still have some pros and cons of the whole model. One of the pros is that we get a certain amount of development done without tapping into the IT budget. Another pro, and this was alluded to I think by Charles, but somewhere in the video, we have people who are very close to those business problems. An awful lot of the apps that citizen developers are creating are to solve a very immediate problem that the creator is experiencing. Listening to the video earlier and listening to what I've said so far, it would be very easy to misquote Shakespeare and say, "All hail citizen developers." I would counsel you to heed the warnings as well, because if we learn from Macbeth, who didn't heed the warnings, he didn't survive to the end of the evening. And that is not what we want to happen. So, what are some of the risks and warnings? One of them is that there's a massive risk of sprawl. If you've got people just creating things to solve an immediate problem, it is very easy for a thing to develop, not quite work, chuck it to one side, start again, or not quite work, make a copy of it, make some further changes. And that sprawl, number one, it needs managing. Number two, there is storage costs. As many of you will know, with the Power Platform, Dataverse and so on, we get an amount, and it varies by license and number of users and so on, but we only get a finite amount of space. So that sprawl can take up space and can therefore go on and start costing inadvertently. Another bigger problem is security challenges. Because again, when we look at what this thing is being asked to do, i.e. in the vast majority of cases, solve a problem for a single user or a small group of users, the chances are security outside of whatever data that particular thing uses is probably not front of mind for a typical citizen developer. Those two also lead to governance challenges. How do we keep all of this on the straight and narrow? How do we know what's going on? And lots of other problems. And the final point that I will raise here is the amount of education that is required has now gone up, because we need to enable a much bigger group of people, and there's lots and lots of training, education required, both for citizen developers so that they are able to work effectively, and of course for the end users who are being expected to use the things that the citizen developers make. So it is easy to see how this whole scenario could quite rapidly end up being quite hideously out of control and causing a lot of unexpected problems. I honestly think you'd have to have been living under a rock for at least the last year to not be aware of some, if not several, of the major security breaches that we've had. I read yesterday that the medical one, round about last September, was an IT person's username got leaked somehow, and that was what the hackers used to get in and then breach. So again, that is just an illustration. I'm not saying that any of that work was done by citizen developers. I'm just saying, using it as an example, that we've got to be very, very aware that there are things way outside the thing that we as a citizen developer are creating to solve a problem that we are experiencing. There's a lot of other factors that sit around it that we need to have a lot of awareness of. One of the ways, and probably the best way, of keeping all of this in control is a centre of excellence. So what is a centre of excellence? Typically, a centre of excellence is a small team of dedicated people separate from the people that they are supporting and helping. They will be leading the way. They act as a sort of torchbearer of whatever can be done. So in the case of a centre of excellence for a power platform, they will be setting an example, showing how good quality things can be made, making education available, and so on and so forth. A centre of excellence will drive innovation and improvement within the organisation. And again, a lot of that will be by setting an example and providing education. It will enable people with business knowledge and understanding of business goals to share that so that information becomes more widely known. A centre of excellence has to be a strong team. So you don't want every man and his wife trying to be part of the centre of excellence. They really do need to be cherry-picked so we get the right people. A centre of excellence also provides thought leadership. And thought leadership, again, is a form of education. So the Centre of Excellence will provide expertise, expert information to help other people. It will certainly provide education to the organisation as a whole. Another task, and a very important task, of a Centre of Excellence is to encourage reuse. But when I talk about reuse, I'm not only referring to technical components. I'm referring to templates, documentation, training, and everything that we need to be able to deploy these things in a successful way. Of course, if we are going to encourage reuse, there is something else that we need to have. Can anyone hazard a guess at what we need to have to make reuse possible? I know it's not a set of coloured bins in the corner. Sorry? Central, yes. Some monitoring, yes. Repository, yes. Okay, I'll give you a clue. It's a C word. Sorry? You're getting close. What I was actually looking for was communication. How can you reuse something that I've created if you don't know it exists? So all of that communication and coordination of what we've got is important, and that should be done by the Centre of Excellence, which of course means communication from the citizen developers up to the Centre of Excellence so that we can create a catalogue or whatever. We also need to have an approach where when you need a thing to do something, before you roll your sleeves up and start creating that thing to do something, you check in the catalogue to see if there already is a thing that gets somewhere close to what you're doing. We do need to be careful with reuse in that We don't want to reinvent the wheel in the way that that bike had its wheels reinvented. And that also is a risk if we don't have all of those other factors happening. So the overall function of the Centre of Excellence is to uphold best practice. And that is best practice across knowledge, skills, performance, vision, ethics, and potential. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen if we're going to stay out of the world of chaos and let the whole thing get out of control. The Centre of Excellence also will encourage continuous improvement. I think that overall the role of a Centre of Excellence on the human side can be described by the acronym BUMPS. And BUMPS is build on, uphold, manage, promote, educate, and support. And in our instance, it is therefore build upon, uphold, manage, promote, educate, support the power platform environment in the organisation. So, who should be on or part of our Centre of Excellence? First of all, it needs to have executive sponsorship at the highest level. What the Centre of Excellence does and says needs to be supported by essentially the board. Now, it's probably a bit much to expect to have a board member on the Centre of Excellence, but we do need to have at least one person who has the ear of the board so that the material, the ideas, the training, the rules, the guidelines, and so on that the Centre of Excellence is producing are, first of all, communicated to the whole organisation, and secondly, followed. It can't just be, oh, who cares, I'll just carry on doing what I'm doing. It has to become part of the overall fabric of the organisation. We also need people with deep technical knowledge of the technology, and that includes architects who can then help with some of the other areas within the citizen development work. We need to have trainers, people who are able to train across the whole of the work being used by and produced by the community, the citizen developer community. We also need to have representation of technical support people, because if we've got things being produced and then communication with a, have a look at this, it might help you do blah. If it doesn't work for a particular user, and there are lots of different nuances that we can put on that doesn't work part of the sentence, the first people they are likely to contact is going to be technical support. And it's a bit rich to expect technical support to support all these things that they don't even know are happening. So we need to have those people on the Centre of Excellence so that they're aware of things coming in and going out. Pretty much everybody on the Centre of Excellence also needs to have superlative communication skills so that they can communicate out to this other world all the stuff that needs to be communicated. So it is certainly not a job for anyone, and it's probably not a job for the faint-hearted, but it is a very important job if we are going to have a successful Power Platform environment world. So now we get to what I suspect some of you thought this entire presentation would be about, and that is the COE starter kit. I think one way of visualizing the Centre of Excellence and the COE starter kit together is the yin to the yang of a citizen developer community. If we want this to be successful, we need a number of things. First of all, the people on the Centre of Excellence, or at least some of them, need to become familiar with the Power Platform Admin Centre. We also need to have a policy where we have different environments for development, for testing, and for production. I'd like to think that that was completely unnecessary to say, but I can say hand on heart from many of the projects that I've been on that they don't have that, or they have an environment called dev, called test, called production, but what they're used for, anyone's guess. The Centre of Excellence should also be tracking the apps and the usage. And then, of course, they should be following up with that. So I mentioned earlier the problem of sprawl. If we've got any apps that are just not being used, they probably need to be discreetly or not too discreetly sent on their way. We need to make sure that all of the apps follow the compliance rules, that they follow security rules. Now, I'm sure there are some people in this room who are significantly more technical than a lot of the citizen developers that we'll be talking about, and yet you've probably struggled understanding security roles and the security model of Dynamics. So we need to have a central body that will make sure that all of the data security is correct. And the COE should also develop tools to enable all of that to happen. So now I'm going to move very briefly to introduce to you the COE starter kit. I only introduce it now because it's only once you understand the why of a Centre of Excellence more generally and in a non-technical sense that you can really see the benefit of the tools and other bits and pieces that Microsoft give us in the COE starter kit. So a successful people aspects that I've mentioned to date, plus successful use of the COE starter kit. What we get in the starter kit is pretty much a number of apps and flows and what I loosely call communications, which are really flows plus email templates that enable you to manage all of the other stuff that is going on. So we get tools to monitor sprawl, tools to monitor usage, tools to know which flows are running, which flows maybe are trying to run but aren't running successfully, and a whole range of other stuff. It is important to mention that the COE starter kit is exactly that. I know some people in the room were on the COE starter kit user group a couple of days ago, and already we've got a load of new stuff. So as with the Power Platform generally, the Power Platform family generally, it is going to evolve. But that is not the key point that I'm making when I say starter kit. It needs to be the kit plus appropriate people with appropriate skills to give you a complete centre of excellence. So once we've got the Centre of Excellence working with the COE starter kit, what do we then get? It means that the development that our citizen developers are doing will better align with the goals of the organisation, rather than being very small, my problem, my solution. We should get efficiency in business processes. It should improve communication, and it will, and this is probably the best one of all, foster innovation and creativity. And with that, I will now hand back to our MCs. Here there is some of my contact details if anyone would like to connect with me and further this conversation.
Thank you, Jill. Any questions? You have questions?
Are you advocating that, generally, is a citizen developer able to go off and just try something themselves without engaging with the CEO, or does the CEO give permission? COE give permission for someone to have a crack at something?
I would argue that it's probably somewhere between the two. I think, and it will vary by organisation, I think one of the ways that this will be most successful is by enabling areas of play, but then we do have issues. I was talking about the budget aspect, that if this person is engaged to do a job, which they obviously are, how much time are we going to allow them to experiment, because it's fun, within the time that we're actually paying them to do their job? So there's all of those issues. I certainly think before a thing is more widely deployed, the COE needs to be, or the Centre of Excellence needs to be involved. But I certainly wouldn't, in the vast majority of organisations, say, no, you can't even have a go until you've done all the paperwork in triplicate and this and that and the other. No.
Because as soon as you say you shouldn't do something like this, until you've engaged with someone else, you've lost me. I couldn't be bothered. I'll just stick to my day job and not pursue innovation.
Agreed. But
And I
then
thought
it's a balance.
So maybe for deployment, because of course someone else needs to pick that up, but just to give people the opportunity to get in and give it a go.
I'd actually be doing a number of things. I'd certainly be making the opportunity quite widely available in a safe area. So hence the dev test environment or environments. I would also be providing the information and the education, because there are very few people who, without some training, are going to be able to create anything of any real use. So again, that education, none of us were born being able to do even no-code stuff. We've learnt it from somewhere. So I'm using the word education. I don't mean that everybody has to go on formal training, but education in an appropriate form needs to be made available. Otherwise, people will spend all of their day job time experimenting and achieving very little, or they may. I'm not saying everyone will, but there is a potential. And that whole balance, you're employed to do whatever you're employed to do. So how do we find the time and the budget and so on to let you do other stuff efficiently?
Quick question, hopefully quick. I might have missed it in the toolkit part of it, but in your experience, as part of that scaling part, does the platform provide any cataloguing repository way to gather up what everyone's been developing and joining using it?
It certainly provides visibility of, or tools that create visibility of apps, flows, and so on.
Yeah.
Whether at the moment there is something that creates a catalogue, I'm honestly not sure, but it'll give you some of it.
So the description of the reusability of it comes down to just what people put into the creation of it.
Yes, I think that there's going to be some interesting overlap between the COE starter kit and DevOps. And I think we might end up with DevOps being a set of tools that very or more technical people use. The COE will be used by the Centre of Excellence and administrators and a few others. And there will be certain tools that, even though we only use them essentially once in an organisation, they sit both in a DevOps pool and a COE pool.
Good try.
There's a lot of opportunity and architecture in this networking through the data.
Okay, so why we had this as a first session, because throughout the day you're going to learn a lot of